All right, well, thank you, all of you, for coming back into the room after the breakout rooms. I hope you had an enjoyable time going into the breakout rooms and engaging with some of our resource experts who are joining us to really help us explore how tailored learning can look in our state, and really thinking about what are some of the changes and shifts that we may need to make in order to make that a reality for our students. And so today we started off very broadly looking at a national perspective, and then we've been whittling down in each one of the sessions that we've done closer and closer and closer to provide as much information as we can for you while you're here today to really think about what is tailored learning and how could tailored learning look in North Carolina and specifically in North Carolina classrooms. And so our final session today is kind of the culmination of all the discussions we've had and really looking at assessment and measuring what matters and understanding why assessment is important and how teachers use assessment in order to personalize the educational opportunities for the kids in their classrooms. And I'm joined today by Leah Carper, who is our 2022 North Carolina State Teacher of the Year, fresh off the stage at, what's it called again? The
South by Southwest?
Yeah, South by Southwest, thank you. Lost it there for a second. And she also is currently serving as the Director of Stakeholder Engagement in Guilford County Schools. We are also really happy to have Nicholas Munyan-Penny, who is joining us from EdTrust. Nicholas is a P12 policy director, and so we're really excited to have him here because he is a true expert in assessment, and so very excited to have him join us on the stage as well. And so, Nicholas, I'd like to go to you first with a question. In tailored learning systems, assessment is not just about measuring performance, but informing what happens next for students. How should we think about the role of assessment in measuring mastery, growth, and readiness? And how does that differ from how assessment functions in traditional time-based systems?
Thanks for that question, and thanks for having me. It's good to see you all today. I think the one thing to think about with assessments in tailored learning system is that really assessments function very similarly, I think, in tailored learning systems and more traditional systems. It's really about thinking about each of those different types of assessments and how they work and their individual purposes, and having a clear understanding of like what this assessment does, what another one does, and why it's there, and how you can use the data that comes out of it to support student learning. So when we think about assessments like screeners and diagnostics, they're really there to help us understand sort of like who are the students that need additional support, and what are the specific types of supports that they need, and allowing us to sort of track that progress over time. And that's really important in a tailored learning system because we're actually trying to make sure that every single student is getting exactly what they need at exactly the right time, so they're able to get to grade level expectations. And then we have things like formative assessments, which is really what happens at the day-to-day level in the classroom, and that is really important. Lisa's going to talk a lot more about that in a second, but those are the things that really allow us to sort of understand what's happening at each individual lesson throughout each individual day and week. That lets us sort of understand like what is the thing that I'm doing in the classroom now that's actually impacting the student? Are they not understanding this? How can I take this and then change what I'm doing tomorrow to make sure that I'm providing the supports that they need? And then there's the summative assessments that come on at the end of this, and that's really to help us understand at the end of the year, at the end of the unit, what is it that students have learned, and have they sort of actually mastered what it is that we want them to master at the end of the year, right? And so one of the things we talked a lot about earlier today is when we think about competency-based education, tailored learning, it's about having a clear understanding about what is it that we all want students to master. And summative assessments really play an important role, being like, okay, across the board, a comparative measure, are students actually getting what we want them to understand? Like, are they actually meeting all of the competencies, particularly around academics? We also talked a lot earlier today about competencies being not just about academics, but about sort of like habits of mind, as well as sort of like behaviors that we want students to exhibit. And those are things that are not actually captured in traditional summative assessments. So I think one thing that we want to be thinking about is, as North Carolina thinks about moving towards a more tailored learning approach, like what are maybe some other types of assessments that need to be developed, worked through, so that we can understand and assess those other pieces in addition to the academics, because they're both really important and we need to make sure that we're looking at both. So I'll just pause there and we can talk more.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Leah, following up to Nicholas's question, and traditional summative assessments play an important role in accountability, but they often provide limited insight into student learning. What are the key limitations of relying on these models alone, and how can formative, adaptive, and competency-aligned approaches better support real-time instructional decision-making?
Thank you. Okay, friends, I only taught state test classes, okay? I taught high school English. I taught 9th grade when the test was in 9th grade and 10th grade when the test was in 10th grade. And at the end of the year, my students took a test that graded our school. It did not really grade them as much. And it didn't really teach me anything. Because here's the thing, I get a raw score after my students took that test. And again, that test is important because it helps show if our students are meeting the standards. It helps you all know what's going on a little bit. But it gave me nothing. It doesn't tell me which standards my kids did well on. It doesn't tell me where they grew. And I'll never get that information in the way the North Carolina system is now. And so that did not help me shape what I was doing every day in the classroom. And that's an issue, right? So that's why we need formative assessments. That's why we need teachers who are professionals all day, every day. Y'all, this is all we do. You teach a lesson and you're constantly checking in and adjusting to what your students need to make sure that they're meeting that mark. And I think about how we have these summative assessments and people think that that's it. But that's not informing my practice as an educator at all. What's informing my practice is my expertise in knowing what to do when it comes to formative assessment. And so what we do in our classroom, so for example, say I was teaching students how to use a semicolon. Who knows how to use a semicolon in here? Oh, I love that. So it's a complete sentence, then a semicolon, and then what comes next? A complete sentence, right? Okay, you learned something today. We'll check formatively later. So I would walk around the room and see if students were doing okay. And sometimes I would notice this kid doesn't know what a complete sentence is. So I have to start completely over with this student. Whereas over here, the student is killing it. They know exactly what a complete sentence is, how to throw in that semicolon, et cetera, and I can keep moving. So this is the opportunity with formative assessments where I can pull in other experts in my school. I can pull in the advanced teaching role teachers who can help me work in small groups with these students who might not understand subject-verb agreement. I might be able to pull in some of our great high-dosage tutors who I can say, listen, this is a grammar issue that we're really struggling here. Can you help my students get this close support right here? But y'all, this is the stuff that teachers are doing every day. This is not the end of the year test. This is our day-to-day expertise. And this is what makes teachers so great, is that we do personalized learning every single day. We just need support to be able to do it better.
Thank you, Leah. Leah, I'd love to follow up to that and just get your viewpoint on, North Carolina already has established an assessment landscape.
Yeah.
We do have tools like Dibbles, and that has been something that we've gotten a lot of great information for teachers in real time that they're able to use them and support their students. But where do you see opportunities to strengthen these systems so they provide more timely, actionable information for educators while still maintaining the comparability, transparency, and public trust?
So do you guys know much about, Dibbles are great. So this is how we find out whether students understand phonemic awareness, they understand the sounds that letters make, et cetera. This is good stuff. This is our K-5 reading stuff that thank you state for paying for this across the entire state of North Carolina. This is really connecting well to the work that we did with the science of reading, et cetera. Teachers use that information all the time. So my besties in the elementary education world expressed to me that they use their Dibbles information. They'll reassess kids every 2 weeks. Some kids will be every 4 weeks, depending on where they are in their levels, and then they can do these targeted approach of interventions. Thank you for a statewide screener that's a continual screener, right, to help us with that formative information gathering. However, that stops after 5th grade. I taught high school. I really needed a baseline for my students so I knew what Lexile level they were on and what they understand about literature, et cetera. And I don't have that opportunity as a 10th grade English teacher in North Carolina to have something that the state provides. And in North Carolina, we don't have anything for math. It's time that we get something for math so that our math teachers can help our students get where they need to go. So while we have great screeners, these are wonderful, we also need to help our teachers know what to do with the information when they get it. So again, teachers are great professionals, but there's a lot coming at them at once, a lot of information, a lot of data. This is where advanced teaching roles is really, really helpful for them because they know what to do with the data because their advanced teacher will help them with that. But also, in our education prep programs, we really need to focus on being data-driven and how to read data and then adapt your instruction to that data. A lot of times I would see, okay, I've got students who are on the 3rd grade reading level and then students who are in college, but there was never anyone telling me what to do with that information. I need help and support, especially as a beginning teacher, knowing what to do with that information. So I feel like we're a little information rich in some aspects, but we need to be great at reading the data and knowing what to do next. So a few things. We would love a math screener. We would love a continual math screener similar to the DIBELS, and we would love for K-12 to have these things for everyone, so that every teacher has information that they need to be able to be able to create this tailored learning that our students deserve to have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah. And Nicholas, as we consider evolving assessment systems to better support tailored learning, what are the most important conditions, such as calibration, grading, consistency, and clear definitions of mastery that must be in place to ensure implementation in both equitable and scalable and avoids creating new forms of inconsistency or gatekeeping?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I'm thinking about most here is something that Leah was talking about, which is really about how do we make sure that educators feel empowered and have the time and space to use the data that they're getting from the assessments that exist already, and also thinking critically about sort of like, what are the assessments that I'm giving, why am I giving them, and at a district level, sort of like, are we giving all of these that are necessary? Do we need to give all of these? Are these all necessary? Why are they here? And thinking about that process. So in terms of like the state level and district level, we want to be thinking about how can we provide guidance to schools, districts, and educators about sort of like, what do all of these assessments mean, and what type of data do they need to provide, and how can we sort of like guide them along sort of what needs to be done with that data. I think another thing that the state can be doing is helping push vendors of these assessments to provide stronger reports of sort of like what is actually coming out of the data, and sort of like what can it actually provide and sort of make real insights for educators, right? Not sort of like giving us just like a scale score or saying like, the student got these 10 questions right or wrong, and it's like, okay, well, what does that actually mean for me as a teacher? How do I then use that information to actually drive instruction in my classroom? Having the both sort of like better reporting that actually gives us some of those insights, and then the time and space to, as an individual teacher, as collaborating with my advanced teachers, collaborating with people who are in the same grade level as me, collaborating with people who are maybe in the same subject as me, thinking about how do we sort of work together to support student needs, and having that sort of like be a policy infrastructure is really, really important. And I think the other thing that's really important about this is making sure that within that, we also have sort of like a clear, consistent benchmark that we're all being measured against at the end of the year, right? So that we're not just sort of like, okay, we're all going about providing individual pathways for our students, but then at the end of the year, did we actually get to where we wanted to be? And the answer might be no. And like, we need to be making sure that that data is then triggering folks in the legislature to be like, okay, these are the schools in particular that may need additional support and resources to get students to where they need to be. So that's sort of like another piece of this as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We would love to open it up to the audience to ask some questions of our two amazing experts here on what assessment is, how assessment can be used, and why assessment is important. So I think, do we have Jonathan in with the mic runner? Oh.
You have a question over here.
Sarah, do you mind just doing the mic running for me? Thank you.
While we're doing that, I have a really good example. My students were struggling with nonfiction texts in my class, as you can imagine, because they're so fun to read. And I asked for our biology teachers and our social studies teachers to really push this concept in their classes. And if we can work together and we can take this assessment and be a team about it, we can really see great gains. It's exciting when we all take ownership of each other's data.
Yes, exactly. We're all working together.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question about assessment transparency. So it was really interesting to me when you pointed out that you don't have full access to this data. So I'm curious about the kind of, it seems like a very high leverage intervention to be able to provide additional access to the existing assessments that we have. So I'm curious about what kind of data transparency and access you might want as educators and also as whole systems, and also about the kind of I've heard from other folks feedback about how we don't have comprehensive access to kindergarten entrance readiness data and others. I'm wondering if there's additional kind of data that would be helpful to have transparent either to systems, to philanthropy, to business, and to you as individual educators.
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about the last part first, around sort of like the kindergarten readiness piece. I think that it's really important to have those types of assessments in place so we understand sort of like where students are coming in. I think very much like in the literacy space, having those like DIBEL screeners in place at the right when students come in allow us to understand sort of like where students are, where they need to move. And I do think it's important though that we're not sort of thinking about, okay, now that we have that information that teachers are using, that we're suddenly being like, that needs to be what we're holding schools accountable for, right? When students are coming in kindergarten, they have sort of like have various different experiences before they came to school. And so providing schools with like a chance to get students all to where they need to be like at third grade, I think we think that's really important to continue to maintain that sort of like schools have time to work with students and get them to that third grade benchmark. And then that's sort of like when we're starting to look at holding schools accountable to sort of how are they meeting those needs, the students' needs.
And recognizing, again, that different tests and assessments are serving different purposes is important. And I think that having those conversations with educators is really important. And that starts in our education prep work and also in our districts. It feels like every assessment is an assessment on me as a teacher, like real talk. Like it's all on me. Like I'm failing the world. Like that's how it feels. And if we can be more open about we are benchmarking, we are gathering information so that we can better support you, educator. I think that it would shift our minds away from testing as the bad word and turn it into this is part of instruction. And this is what I tell any teacher that I mentor is that continual assessment is just part of great instruction. And so I think we need to have a mind shift on that. But that also means that we need to be less punitive when it, like you were saying, when it
Yeah,
comes
no,
to
I think that's
assessment.
exactly right. Like, and it's not just about like pulling that pressure away from the teacher and that's like putting it on the school. It's like, how do we make sure that the collective whole system is responsible for students, right? Like the legislators are just as responsible for student success as you are in the classroom. Like we're all responsible as a collective to make sure that the students in the state are getting the supports that they need. And various assessments help different actors in the system understand how they can act on that data to support their specific role. And so like, for example, formative assessments really helping you day to day in the classroom, whereas like summative assessments help folks who are further from the school understand sort of like, okay, how can I sort of triage with the limited resources that we have to provide the supports where they're needed most.
And kindergarten readiness is a great, assessments are a great way to show what our community is doing to support early education and even food, housing, et cetera. That's good information too.
Yeah.
First off, Leah, Manzo Spencer from Cumberland County. I use a lot of those RI standards in my informational text in my
Yes,
classroom.
you do.
So we do support you. Social studies does support you very much so, at least in my classroom. But assessments measure mastery. I have found that in my classroom and some of my colleagues, we are struggling with the formative assessments being all computer-based. Do you see that technology is a detriment to students now because of the oversaturation of tech? Do you think the old school Scantron bubble sheets where we read them out, or those things would be more advantageous to our students, or are we in this age of technology and we need to adjust?
We were just talking about this in the green room. You want to go for it?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think that we need to be thinking about like, it's a both and approach, right? So like, I think that there are places where it's really helpful to have digital assessments because they allow us sort of the behind the scenes adjust to what's happening. I think there's also a lot of advancements in like AI and other technologies that can help understand not just sort of like what's happening when they click a certain button on the screen, but sort of like what's happening behind that. And you can actually design the question. So if you select one answer versus another one, it's actually telling us really important information potentially like about math, like what's a misconception that a student might have. If a student selects B, they might have this misconception about math, and that is an information that we can then provide to educators. If they're like, oh, well, half your students selected answer B, then you're like, okay, well, I might need to go back and talk about this concept because my students didn't understand it. But that doesn't mean we want to replace sort of like real human types of formative assessment where they're built into sort of like your day-to-day teaching when you're walking around, when you're doing exit tickets. Those are types of things that are really important. But we don't want them to sort of like be all on you to generate those. I think it's really important as we think about sort of the adoption of high quality instructional materials, alignment with the really important literacy work that you're doing in the state, that those types of curriculum materials that are being adopted have really strong embedded assessments that you can be using in your classroom that don't necessarily involve having a student sitting down at a computer and taking a test.
And that as we're choosing and selecting those tools, that we're including actual practitioners in those conversations and not
Yes.
people who hear a really good sales pitch and they're like, oh, that sounds like it's going to be great. It probably will be, but have we asked a teacher, or lots of them, what they think about that, because they're the ones who are going to be using that tool in their classrooms every single day.
Yeah, and that's the same when it comes to reporting as well, right? Like when we want to improve reporting, it's not just sort of like, well, what do I think as someone who's an advocate on the outside thinks what good reporting is? It's like, no, what do classroom teachers actually need in terms of insights? That should be what's driving reporting.
It makes me think of one of the breakout sessions we had today where it was like student-centered, right? The students are in the middle, and how can we tailor our work from whatever level we are down to the student? And so we need to be talking to the people, the families, our teachers, practitioners, the people who are closest to the work, to make sure that we are providing that tailored instruction.
Yeah, one of the things we said in that room is that we are all so fortunate to get to be in this room, and we're privileged to be here because we have kindergarten through 12th grade kids in our schools. And so remembering that we as the adults have the responsibility to design education in a way that's benefiting them, and making sure that we take that responsibility very, very importantly, and understand that we do need to make sure that everything we do remains student-centered, and that any information we're collecting on our students is going to benefit them in the classroom, identify ways that we're able to really help them navigate K-12, where can we accelerate them, where might they need intervention, and ensuring that every decision we're making on behalf of those kids is something that's going to benefit them and help them live their best life because they went to North Carolina's public schools.
And if we really get good teacher buy-in, good practitioner buy-in, then when we hear that conversation about, oh, all we do is test kids all day, the more tests, when teachers can express like the value of this work, it'll help too, back to your point as well.
Wait, Winston, hang on one sec. She's going to bring you the mic, otherwise it doesn't catch up on the recording. Thank you.
No accident, I'm sitting next to a former music teacher. What do you think we can learn from arts educators, physical education educators, coaches in the sports arena about performance assessments, and what do they have to teach other academic educators about that? As I'm sitting next to Dr. Morrison.
I think a lot about my daughter, who is she's an animation major at UNCG, and she has a lot of performance-based critiques that she deals with. And she had something where she had to draw a line. And the way that they drew a line, they were assessed on that. And I said, girl, are you kidding me? But there's a strategy and a technique, right? If you want to get it right, you have to do it the right way. And so I do think that there's something to be said for performance, right? If you can play the song, if you can keep the rhythm, if you can keep time. But also when you record that, and then a month later see if they can do it even better, that growth, right? And I think that that's really helpful for a teacher in those performance-based things, because that line that she drew was at the beginning of the semester, and then at the end of the semester, I guess she's really good at lines, y'all, I don't know, but she improved on her line drawing. We're paying a lot of money for that. And it's going great. But I feel like, I do think that there is something to be taken from our arts, and especially when it comes to growth. Because people talk about perfect performance, but does that even exist, right? Because there's artist interpretation and things like that, but you can see improvement. And I think that as a teacher, how you get student buy-in is by showing them how far they've come. And so I think that I've never been able to make a basket in basketball, or I just don't do the whole sports thing. Good, go team. I hope everybody had fun out there on the field. But in high school, I did. And when I tell you, I followed through, I did everything, right? And when I finally did it, that made me feel like something. So there is something to be said.
Yeah, I think the other thing to think about here is like it's about putting someone in like a real scenario, right, where they're sort of like using the skills that they probably would use them in real life, which is harder to do in sort of like more traditional based assessments, right? You can't just sort of model what that looks like, at least not with current technology. I think there's a lot of innovations that are trying to make sort of more scenario-based things more plausible and sort
Science
of
labs.
Exactly. So that's helpful in that regard, especially we're thinking about like the competencies in terms of like habits of mind and those sort of like ways that we're approaching learning. But I do think that we need to be careful about sort of like taking that and then extrapolating that to then we can definitely use this to sort of use it for accountability purposes and to compare students across districts and schools. Because I don't think that we sort of like have yet figured out sort of the infrastructure to sort of make that work at scale. We've seen states like New Hampshire really try to like think about what this looks like, and they unfortunately sort of like had to abandon sort of like the statewide scaling of this work because it was really difficult for them to figure out how to like get consistency in terms of like grading across the state. So I think there's a lot of room to sort of still explore what those look like, but maybe not yet sort of ready for prime time in terms of like replacing some of the assessments to have that comparable data that we need to reallocate resources equitably.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? All right, well, I would love to lean in on that last question as well. So I was a swimmer my entire life, all the way through college, and then coached at 71st High School in Cumberland County. And I've often had people ask me what were the best lessons I learned, and especially in performance-based. And it's really about, first of all, you're teaching kids how to fail and then get back up and do it again. And that's a really hard skill. That's hard for us as adults. It is incredibly hard if you don't learn to do it as a child, to really be able to harness that. And I think that's one thing that we as adults a lot of times think, oh, you didn't do well on this the first time, you failed this the first time. In my classroom, a fail always meant my first attempt in learning, because they weren't actually failing. We were just figuring out what they didn't quite know, and we go back and we do it again. And my students never thought that they were being assessed, because to them, assessment meant a test, and we weren't ever taking tests. But as Leah said, I was doing formative assessment all the time. So if I was walking around my classroom and I noticed that one of my students wasn't able to fill out the foldable correctly or wasn't able to engage in the lab correctly, then I was able to see that in real time, and I could immediately address that on the spot and do a quick reteach moment and help that child so that now, tomorrow, they know that information. And sometimes you have to tell it to them 14 or 15 times. Sometimes it's 50 times. But by giving our teachers the opportunity and for helping them understand what assessment truly is and how they can utilize assessment in a way that's informing their instruction every day, it's a game changer for the kids in our classrooms. And unfortunately, a lot of times the way that we have our days structured, it's really difficult for teachers to put that formative assessment into their classrooms because they have to get so many things done in a day. And at the high school level, we had 90 minutes a day to do that. And those 90 minutes go by really fast. And so really trying to help teachers understand what are the assessment tools that are available to them, ensuring that those assessment tools do align with best teaching practices and high quality instructional materials, and really helping our teachers have the tools at hand so that they can make the instructional decisions that result in our kids being successful.
And that comes with respecting our educators as true professionals in their field, that they know what's best for their students when they see our students productively failing, right? We have trust that our educators are going to make the right next move to guide them where they need to go. And so if we equip them well, if we give them high quality instructional materials, and if we give them assessments, screeners, diagnostics that they can use, and then we give them the competency to be able to read this data and then go for it, right? I think that we can be unstoppable.
And I think that's true when you think of take it up to the next level in terms of accountability systems too. It's like when we grade schools with F, it's not saying that your school is a failure forever. It's saying that this is where you are at this point in time, and we're going to then use that information to help us give you the supports that you need. It's not a punitive measure. It's just sort of saying, okay, this is where we are now, and we're going to move forward from this spot.
Love that.
All right, do we have any other questions from the audience for this afternoon? All right, well, with that, I am pleased to hand it over to Brenda, who is going to do our closing remarks.